Hello and welcome to Retro Island Diskettes, the podcast where we abandon a guest on Retro Island, but not before they share with us the stories that make up their life in the computer industry.
To help our guests tell their story, we'll also play 8 music tracks that they have selected, and these must be tunes of computer origins, such as video games or scene demos. So who's our guest today, Neil?
Well, today on our video feed, I'm looking at the familiar face of today's guest, even though I've never met him. It's because that face seemed to be in every single computer magazine that I ever bought in the 80s and 90s advertising his wares. I don't know if you remember that face. Andrew.
I do.
It was everywhere. He was a pioneer of sports management games with a focus on football or soccer, and I'm sure his influence touched on many other sports games of every flavour. It's the man with the perm from my old magazines. It's Kevin Toms. Welcome, Kevin.
Good morning, and I have to say straight away, I never permed my hair.
There it is. You heard it here first.
It's a natural wave.
The ominous sounds of the Space Invaders working their way down the screen to Kevin's spaceship, which he was controlling in 1979. What memories do these sounds evoke for you, Kevin?
Well, the sound itself, sadly, is kind of relaxing. But what it really reminds me of is the weeks me and my colleagues used to spend. We used to go to a pub at lunchtimes when I was working in Northampton. And it had a Space Invaders machine, and we used to take it in turns to play it and try and beat it. And it was a typical beer and a pint lunch and a good relaxing time. But it took us weeks, and we always wondered what would happen after the first screen was complete. And disappointingly, sort of, it just goes faster.
And were you following the video games industry closely at this point to look for a way in, or was that still just a bit of fun that you had down at the pub?
That makes me smile, because the video games industry. Oh. At that time, when I launched the game in January 1982, the video games industry, well, everybody was selling by mail order. There was no retail outlets at all. It wasn't a shop you could buy a computer game. So there were people buying computers and computer games being sold, but all off the page in magazines like Computer and Video Games. And my first advert was a quarter page in Computer and Video Games. And every sale was mail order, and it took a few months before a handful of specialist retailers started up, and then eventually went into the chain stores, and the whole thing changed.
1980 saw Sir Clive Sinclair's ZX80 computer arrive, and suddenly home computing truly was affordable when compared to the machines from the US. And this was followed in 1981 by the ZX81, and I believe you picked up one for yourself. What did that offer you, and what didn't you have access to before?
Well, firstly, the ZX80 was only, if I remember rightly, 1K. That was useless for a strategy game that I had written and created on the Video Genie, which needed more, and the ZX81 did have the 16K RAM pack option, so I focused on that, and the price was a huge advantage. I think it was maybe a third of the price of the TRS-80 Video Genie or less, and much more affordable for people. So I recognized that this would make it popular. It was getting some traction. And so I converted the game onto the ZX81. And that was a very good move, because if I hadn't done that, then the amount of money I was spending on the adverts in Computer and Video Games would have just been wasted. Because in the first 300 games I sold in the first few months, 297 were on the ZX81. Wow. And three were on the TRS-80, and in fact it was so low and such a lack of sales on the TRS-80 Video Genie that I actually just gave up and dropped it from the adverts altogether. I didn't think it was even worth the space to look after. So that's the rarest game. That's the rarest Football Manager game, is the TRS-80 version, TRS-80 Video Genie version.
There you go. There's a hot tip for collectors. So Did you feel at this point, you've released the game on the TRS-80, on the ZX81, where you're seeing more success. So you've created this game, originally a board game idea. You've made it into a video game. Did you feel at this point that you were on a new frontier? Did you feel that you were in a special place, or was it just still a hobby? And could you foresee where this was going?
I think there was a couple of steps. Firstly, when people played the game, people I knew first, I couldn't get them off the game, and that's what actually led to the name of the company, Addictive Games, because I realized the game was addictive, and that was in a positive sense at that time. Nobody ever thought it was being a negative thing, and so that was the first part. And I think the other thing, I was 24 years old when I started all this, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just working out step by step. I did at some point when the sales were gradually building. I was thinking, because I was still working as a computer programmer, and this was in my spare time. I was thinking to myself, this maybe I could do this as a job. It seems to be the sales were, I was getting sales that were quite substantial compared to what I was earning, and then there was a turning point where that became absolutely true. But yeah, that's one computer game show, the ZX Micro Fairs, £1,000 in one day, and I was earning $8,000 for a year at the time, $8,000 a year.
Wow!
So you can imagine at that point I started to think, I've got something here.
Yeah. And were there any other titles that you were taking inspiration from at the time? Because it was quite a unique genre. In fact, you were defining a genre. Or were there any other titles that you would say were doing the same thing as you at the time?
I didn't really look at that too much, and partly because I was in a path on my own at that point. There was certainly it was the founding Football Manager game, and even the style of game was unique at the time, in that it was a strategy decision-making game when most people were producing arcade game clones in the small amount of memory that the ZX 81 had, for example. So when I at the computer fairs, which was the first time, these small computer fairs where I started meeting people who played, I would spend quite a bit of time explaining what the game was and what you had to do, because it was different. So the closest things to it would be other strategy decision-making games like Adventures or something like that. And later, of course, people started seeing the idea and cloning it to other sports as well. So that happened.
When you ported it from the TRS-80 to the ZX-81, effectively it's almost like a new version. Did you make any improvements in that process? No,
in that case, it was trying to reproduce, because it was already working as a game, and people were playing it and really liked it. So it was making it work. And you got to realize, at this point, it was purely text. It was only a text game. And if I remember rightly, the memory was so restrictive, I could only have 8 teams in each division as well. So, it was really squeezed down to make it work. But yeah, so fitting it into the memory was part of the issue. And keeping the gameplay, which is by that point I defined and got working, the balance in the gameplay. That was the focus. When it came to the Spectrum, it changed. But yeah.
Yeah. You did go on to make improvements, as you say, on the ZX Spectrum. So we'll come on to that shortly. But first of all, would you like to introduce your next tune, please, Kevin?
My next tune is Buck Rogers' Planet of Zoom, which is just a game for some reason I really liked playing in the arcades. And I think the main thing was I liked that it was just a hypnotic game where you were flying into the screen and shooting at things. Very simple. I tend to like things, the gameplay is very easy to get into and I don't have to work too hard. So they're kind of relaxing. Terrible sound if I remember it, but I can't be sure.
Buck Rogers' Planet of Zoom on a Sega arcade there. Sound effects which would have fought for your attention in a dimly lit arcade filled with attract sounds and sticky carpets. Were you not tempted to make an action arcade game for yourself, Kevin?
That's a good question. Actually, it's kind of always stayed in, excuse me, in the background as a thing I want to do. And I'm probably more likely to do it now at some point, some straightforward game. I'd like to, because I think I can do a good job on gameplay. So I'd like to just do it in that environment. But I've always had too much strategy game work lined up like I do now in order to be able to switch. But at some time I'll take some time out and do that.
Yeah. The first two versions of Football Manager you wrote in BASIC, I believe, and that was quite an unusual thing to do at the time. Programmers were gearing more towards assembly language.
Especially given the memory constraints.
Yeah. Why did you make that decision, Kevin?
Well, firstly, when you say the first two, you mean the two computers?
The TRS-80 and the ZX-81
yes.
that we've spoken about.
There was two options you could write at that time. There weren't any development tools around to use or anything like that. You had two options. You could either, as you say, go in assembler and sort of poke the code in, or you could write in BASIC. And I was a professional programmer already. And the idea of using machine code to write a strategy game would seem to me pretty much insane, because most of the work is in balancing the strategy. It's not just marching animation around the screen. It's all of the interacting mathematics, and I would have just been making work for myself to have to then to try and. Because I do a lot of tuning, a lot of experiment and tuning, and and that includes the developing the strategy elements themselves. So what attributes are going to be, how they're going to interact with each other, the timing, that sort of thing. I would have spent all my time battling with the language instead of battling with the design. So I still would say now that would have been crazy. And the other thing was that the advantages of anti-piracy protection were, or hiding your code or whatever, were minimal at that time, because piracy didn't exist, amazingly, and you just didn't think about those things really. So I did some modifying to make that not so easy, but I didn't do much.
And how did you go about the actual playtesting to make sure you'd got those attributes and the way they interact with each other right? Did you have a test group, or was it all your own testing?
It's no. I would start with myself, because I still to this day write games to try and that I like myself. So that's still a starting point, and then test on other people and see, just friends and family, and see what their reaction is. And that was when I started to realize, oh, Christ, it's good. By their reaction that they start playing. I explain it, and then they wouldn't stop playing. So that, it has a pace to it, which is deliberate, of enjoying, stimulating, and then stopping, thinking. It has a flow to it, which allows people to play for a very, very long time if they want to.
So it's 1982, before the internet. You've got your first commercial game, Football Manager, ready for release. How did you actually go about distributing and marketing it?
Well, yeah, I did draw on some of the text stuff that I observed before. I think not just the reviews, but highlighting features. Oh yeah, sorry, this is coming back to me as I'm speaking. But actually, one of the things that I realized was there was quite a lot of good features in the game. I think. A lot of the games at the time were very simple. There was a lot of different things: promotion and relegation, 4 divisions. You can pick your team, buy and sell players, and all that. That adds interest. So I did list them, and then some. It was a 1/4-page ad, basically, in a magazine. So there was something to make it look good, a nice image, title. And then descriptions of the features, and then where you buy it, and then it's where to put it. And I decided that Computer and Video Games magazine would be the one to try, and that proved to be correct, because it was popular at the time. And then just placed the ads month by month, and then got the checks through the post.
So did you produce the tapes
first
on demand, or did you have a big stack of stock ready?
No, no, no. I produced the tapes to order, and I can remember some discussions about that. And also, of course, how can I guarantee? Because they were audio cassettes, so they had to go into people's audio cassette to play through their computer, and everybody has a different cassette. You know, I didn't know whether what I was producing would work on different machines, different audio, different tape players. But it worked out well, and I can remember the one I used was a Radio Shack cassette recorder from Tandy, and it did work well. And I can also remember a discussion at one of those small game shows I was talking about, the ZX Microfairs, and somebody said, "What if it doesn't work on my machine?" And I said, I remember saying this. I said, "Well, then you just tell me what cassette recorder you've got, and I'll go and buy it, and I'll record it for that."
So that means if someone's got an original audio tape copy, one it's like almost as good as an autograph.
And you can actually, they are identifiable because they have the other part was actually, and it was from Tandy. I bought 300 blank cassettes. I think they were C30s, and you can identify those games because those cassettes I've got a stamped copyright and address on them. Nice. They're not printed.
So turning game developers into rock stars by using their name and their image, as you did on your adverts, that became quite a popular thing in the 80s, but you were doing this very early on. Were you the original rock star game developer, and did anyone recognize you from those adverts?
Yeah, and I did it because of the reaction I got when I was at the game shows, when I would talk to people about the game, and then I'd say I did it that way because I did it this way, and they said, "What, you wrote it?" And I said, "Yeah," and they said, "Oh, I really love the game," and so they were all excited because they met the author, and then I realized, well, in my own sense, I just thought, well, what's the difference between this and books and music? I mean, it's done by a particular person and they have a style, and so what's wrong with that? And I obviously had enough confidence and pride in the game that I was prepared to take the risk of putting my face to it, and yeah, it worked. No question, it worked. And yes, I did get recognized at odd places, like at a petrol station or in a bar or even on holiday in Italy. There was strange places that I would get recognized, but it was nice, yeah.
So we'll come on to what happened next for you and Football Manager. But just thinking about your initial release of the game, was it well received? Was it an instant hit?
Yeah. I mean, everybody seemed to love the game. I mean, that actually worked because that's where the loop back was. Because first I just placed the ad with the features. And then people were buying the game, and then they started writing me letters because there was no internet. So they started writing me letters about how they loved the game and what they thought. And then I started using the content of their letters and what their comments, the exciting, exhilarating ... thing. I started using that, but as I felt it should be, which was with substantial comments from people. And the people whose comments they used, they loved it when they found out you used my comment. So great. Because I would say Neil M or something like that. I wouldn't put their full name, but they knew who they were. Yeah. That worked well as well because I was trying to add confidence to people that the game was good, so they would buy it. And I was using substantial comments from people because I felt that was more honest, which it was.
Did you ever get any comments from anybody who'd bought the game and was expecting a sort of arcade game and ended up with a spreadsheet?
Spreadsheet? How dare you? That's other games. I never do that. I do things much more playable than that. But algorithms, not spreadsheet. Algorithms.
While you're slightly outraged, Kevin, I've got a game that I want to show you that I came across yesterday in the archives. This, believe it or not, is a video game for the Amstrad PCW, which is a word processor. And it's called World of Soccer by Sports Strategy by Coda Software. Have you ever heard of this game?
No.
World of Soccer. And I was just flicking through the manual. And in the intro, I'll read to you what it says. It says, When we introduced our first soccer management game, League Division 1, for the BBC Micro in 1983, we were inundated with telephone calls asking, "What do you mean by a football soccer management game?" Unknown to us at that time, Addictive's Football Manager was beginning its very successful run for the Sinclair range of computers. From there on, the question changed to, "Is it anything like Football Manager?" The answer was definitively no, in capitals and an exclamation mark. So they're obviously threatened by you in the introduction to their own game.
Yeah. That's really good. That sounds good for me, actually. Yeah. No, I mean, the spreadsheet thing is that I have a certain style that I like, which is that I make the complexity as hidden as possible and very accessible and easy play. But the game is subtle underneath. The complexity is underneath. But I don't like just to keep adding detail in detail. And if I was to criticize other football management games, they become more and more complicated. And, I prefer a kind of minimalist approach just because it's all about fun. I mean, that's really what it's got to be about, not turning it into a job. I am a real football manager and I've got all these problems. No, I mean, it shouldn't be like that. So, and I think people still like that. They tell me they still do. So, with the recent stuff I'm doing, so.
Good. Well, we'll come on to the evolution of Football Manager and the competition.
Yeah.
But first, can you introduce us to your next track, please, Kevin?
My next track is Outrun, and again, another game where I just like the feel. Again, this driving into the screen, this thing that I seem to like, but also the sort of color and feel of California, and I mean, it just has that nice atmosphere about it. Palm trees, etc. Yeah, love that. Not spreadsheets.
No,
Actually,
I can't believe he said that.
I didn't know I'd made a faux pas there.
No, it's funny because that's what people say to me. They actually say that. They say, "I really love this." They said, "So many other football management games are like spreadsheets." They say,
Yeah.
They actually say that. So it's not just coming from me. So.
I think I know. I'm going to be a little bit churlish. I mean, I remember I wasn't into those sorts of games. My friends really were, but I always sometimes felt to me like when you get a football game now where you have to select your team and do some faffing before you get to play the arcade football game. It felt to me like that part. Where's the kicking the ball bit?
Are you trying to make Kevin hang up?
No. Outrun is an all-time classic, and that was the music from the Game Over screen, which I know Neil hears a lot. Where did you get your Outrun fix, Kevin? And was it in the full-sized sit-down cabinet?
Occasionally, yes. In the arcades, definitely. Mostly not. But yeah, definitely I played the sit-down cabinet one as well. That's great.
Yeah, great game. Great experience.
I always feel when you're playing that, especially, I guess on the stand-ups, the most common I've had, the gear stick.
Yeah.
It always feels in an arcade that you're allowed to slam that as hard as you can, as if you're trying to break it.
Well, you've got to use that as a brake in Outrun. I don't use the brake pedal. You just slam it into low gear to slow down and back into high again. But by this point, Kevin, football managers starting to appear in the high street stores, the likes of W.H. Smith's, Boots and John Menzies. How did you make the jump from the mail order, producing your own and selling them by mail, into those high street stores?
They contacted me. I just got I can't remember, it's a phone call, I think, from Smith's, WH Smith at the time, and they said, we like your game and we want to stock it. We'd like you to come down to see us. And so I was invited down to London to their headquarters to meet the buyer and talk about selling it to them, and which was quite an experience for me. And they told me what they wanted. Actually, I'll tell you, I had some advice first. I went to see a business advisor because basically I was selling the game to about 5 or 6 small specialist games outlets at the time, because at that point that had started happening. So people, very nice people, they just thought there was a great market for computer games, and they started their own shop, And so I started packaging up for the shops, did a new printed cover, and there was a sort of hang-up package as well. And I charged them a typical retail discount of 30% off the price, so they had a 30% markup to make money. And when it was WH Smith, I had no idea what the discount should be. So I called in a business advisor, and he was a guy from from the business service, the government business service. In every locality they have advisors, and they're experienced business people. He actually had worked for Mars, he said, the manufacturer sweets, and he said, well, it can vary. He said, we would sometimes give up to 70%, and it could be 50%. It depends on your industry, but the problem is yours is a new industry. It doesn't have anything established. So he said, I don't know what to advise you, but I would say that maximum should be about 70%, and 50% would be good. So I went with that information, and I thought, okay, I'll try and get something lower, but if I get 60%, I'll think I've done okay, and try and get 50%. So I went down there, ready to negotiate, and he called me in and he talked about the game, and he said, really love the game. We want to stock it, but we can't stock a game with single color inlay. I think I had a red or a blue inlay at the time with black writing, so it was just simple printing. He said, we've got to have 4 color, which is basically full color inlays before we'll stock it in the store, so you have to do that. And he said, can you do that? And I said, yes. And he said, and I want 2,000 units, and I want 55% discount. And I thought, well, this is the time for me to negotiate. So I said yes.
That was that.
That was my powers of negotiation. It's like just agreeing to everything he said. And but of course, I was a bit blown away by the order for 2,000 units. That at the time was added up to almost what I was making in a year in salary in one order. Mm-hmm. So that was quite something. And then I had to set about designing the full color inlay, and that was where the cut with the players running around it was designed, which was very popular. And I remember talking to the artist in Bletchley. I was living in Milton Keynes at the time, and discussing getting that painted. It was painted originally.
Were you still able to make a profit despite the discounts and the cost of your new printing technology?
Yeah, no, we as you say, the costs were there, but we made a profit, and we got a reorder, which was quite a funny event as well. Well, I was still working at the time, and as a programmer, and my girlfriend rang me up and said, "Oh, we've got a new order from WH Smith." It was about a month later, so after they delivered the 2,000. So I said, "Really?" I said, "Already?" I said, "Oh, great. How much is it?" She said, "Oh, it's 100 units." I said, "Oh, okay, that's good." And she said, No, I got that wrong. It's 1,000. Great. Yeah, she's not good at maths. So I said, "That's great. 1,000 already." I said, "Oh, I can go full time on this now. I can go full time on this. This is great." When I got home, it was 10,000.
Oh, wow. Was this the same girlfriend who you had to convince buying the TRS-80 would be profitable? A good idea.
Yeah.
Wow, so the orders are really piling in. And was this all happening under the banner of Addictive Games? Had you established that as a company?
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
And the employees at that time was just you?
Nil. Nil.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I was still in Milton Keynes at that point. I didn't start employing people until something I'd been planning. I relocated to Bournemouth. So that became the new home of Addictive Games. In fact, I was looking to... It was because I realized I would become established in Milton Keynes and I'd already planned to leave. That it was kind of the company that really said, "No, if I'm going to leave, I've got to do it now. Otherwise, I'll have to start to get offices and become more serious."
Yeah.
So,
and that became established on the Lansdowne Road in Bournemouth, I believe. Is that right?
Richmond Hill.
Richmond Hill, which is
actually Albert Road first, and then Richmond Hill.
Yeah, which is within a stone's throw of where I bought my first Amiga. There you go. That's my old neck of the woods. Know it very well. And also, Future Publishing was on Richmond Hill as well, I think.
They weren't then.
They weren't then.
If they are now, or they have offices down there now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
There you go. Well, by 1984, Football Manager was available on everything. Andrew, why don't you list them off there?
Okay.
So the game was on
the Amstrad CPC, the Commodore 64, the ZX81, the ZX Spectrum, the Electron, the BBC Model B, the Auric Atmos, the Auric 1, the VIC-20, the Dragon 32, and maybe the MSX.
Coming soon, according to the advert that I saw from 84, was coming soon, the MSX. So, and then by 1987, it was available on 16 different platforms. Were you creating all of these ports, Kevin, or were you farming the work out to port them?
I had people working for me that were doing the conversions. I was supervising the conversions, but I'm not actually doing them. Because quite frankly, I had a business to run first. And quite frankly, that'd probably be mind-bendingly boring for someone who creates the games to actually be duplicating the code over and over and again. And it did lead to me later focusing on cross development so that it wouldn't have to be done. And I did that for Football Manager too. But I started that because I was also developing other games, or trying to, because the business was quite busy. That Software Star was the next one that I wrote. So I was focused on that as well, rather than duplicating the game. But there was such demand. I mean, everything. It was, I remember when the Plus4 and the Commodore 16 came out. Did you list them?
No. So even more, yes.
So they only had a relatively compact market. I mean, they sold for a while. They were cheap. But yeah, the game was successful on that format as well. That was a text-only version. It had to be on that one.
You talked about the low sales on the original TRS-80. Did you ever regret choosing any of these other systems? So, for example, the Dragon 32 or the Auric 1, they mustn't have got you many sales, surely.
I think the Dragon 32 was okay. The Auric 1, I have in my memory that we never released it on the Auric 1 because there was a technical problem that the hardware was so unreliably produced that you could test it on one Auric 1 and it would work, and you test it on another one and it wouldn't. And then after going through that loop, so the code was completed and the code was there, but couldn't get it to be reliably manufactured on Auric 1 and gave it up. So although people say it's out there, in my mind, in my memory, it never got out.
The Auric 1, every machine is bespoke.
Yes. You get a custom hand built by Fred or Barry.
So all these stores now started to shipping, thousands of copies. And then it was at this time you decided to give up your normal job and focus entirely on addictive games. How surprised were you by the success of Football Manager?
It built. I don't think I ever got experience of surprise because it just built step by step. It was just a momentum. And there were certain things that surprised me, like when I got an order from Tahiti for 6 games. It's like, my God, But I think the rest of it was just you were in it. and it was building, and you were dealing with the next problem. And adaptation. You can imagine it started off as mail order, and then it was retail stores, and then I was experiencing the evolution of the games industry. Because, so say, first there was no retail outlets, then there was a handful of retail outlets, then there were the chain stores, and then there were middlemen coming in between the retail outlets and and us. So there were wholesalers effectively and distributors, and then there was international sales. People wanted to sell overseas and translations, etc. So it just was one after the other in a good way.
So you were able to look back at the grind, as it were, and appreciate all of those steps and hard work. Like if I say it now, I can certainly say I made a lot of mistakes, but I think that's true of life generally, and it's very easy to say if I was not in my sort of late 20s, I would have done things in a more experienced way, but I wasn't older. So, so I've no regrets in that way, but I certainly would love to have had the opportunity to use my wisdom of experience. But I almost feel sorry for these guys who have their titles bought off them by Microsoft, their very first title for billions of dollars, and they never fully appreciate the effort.
The grind.
Yeah. They're missing out. They really are. A holiday home in Malibu is nothing compared to, it's nothing compared to...
Bed sits in Skegness, can't afford to go abroad.
They didn't live.
Well, by this point, when you're not eating ice creams on the beach down at Bournemouth, you've got a hit game on your hands, you've got a publishing company, you've got a relationship with high street giants. Was this the time to capitalise on other coders' games to invite, or were you ever sent games from other coders to try and publish?
Yes, that did happen, and so it just happened. We weren't looking for it; it just happened. They would send them, and some of them were good, and we decided to start, selling them as well. So there's a handful of them we did over time. The problem was, it was a fact actually, is that nothing sold as well as Football Manager. That was still the dominant sales game. But yeah, there were some other good games, definitely.
So we'll find out what the future held for addictive games next. But first, please introduce your next tune.
My next tune, I've forgotten.
All right, we can do that.
International soccer.
International soccer. Yes. International soccer. Yes. That was a game where it was the thing that Football Manager didn't do. It was just playing a match, and the thing that I really liked about it, and I still would probably like about it, I'd have to try it again, was that the controls were very simple, so that you could very easily work out what you had to do, and yet it played well. So there wasn't a lot of trick maneuver moves to make. It was very simple to kick the ball and to move things in a specific direction. And I think some games get so hard to learn because you've got to learn all these tricks. I prefer it when it's really straightforward.
Those were the hyper-realistic sounds of international soccer on the C64. Soccer games of this period were not really known for their music scores, but I think the SID chip there on the C64 does a good job of emulating the sound of leather on football. Tell us about life at Addictive Games, Kevin. Was it all work and no play, or did you have a good work-life balance?
No, it was pretty hard, actually. There was a lot to do. It was pretty busy. One thing I became really good at is switching roles, switching between different tasks, because there were so many different things that I had to deal with. And when I got a chance, I would be writing some code, but it got harder and harder to write code, actually.
So did you ever find through managing the company, that you were getting frustrated and look back to your coding days, nostalgic.
Yeah, no, that became more of a thing that was a challenge for me, and I eventually took advice on that to say, what can I do? I've got this problem, and the guy said to me, again, another business advisor, and said, I think you just need to decide which thing you want to do. He said, do you want to just focus on business and just focus on becoming a business person, or do you want to get back to writing, in which case maybe we need to look at some kind of sale of the company.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do? Did you start to hire management staff or more coders?
I had a mix of staff. I had, administrative, a couple of coders, and people just basically to run the operation. At one time, we were doing our own manufacturing as well. So various different things.
Mm-hmm. The underlying software then for Football Manager was essentially a management simulation engine. Did you then apply that to other industries? I believe you mentioned Software Stars. Was that based on the same foundation?
Yeah, I just realized that some aspects of what I was doing were quite fun, and I decided it would be good to write a game about that. And so I wrote a game called Software Star about running a software games company. And I thought of it being a little bit like trying to produce hits, like in the music business, and wrote it kind of that way with charts. And it was a very playable game, actually. A lot of people still like it and still ask me to recreate it.
There was a Rockstar Ate My Hamster, which was based on the music industry. That was all about managing a band. Did you ever try that one, Kevin?
I definitely played a music industry game, but I don't know whether it was that one. I don't remember the hamster.
I think it's fair to say that you had established Football Manager as a genre-defining game. Did you start to see copycat games appear which wanted to ride on your success?
Oh, yeah, there were definitely a lot of copies. Copies both of the Football Manager concept started to appear, and of the same concept adapted to other sports. There was a thought about doing that ourselves, but there was just no time. Although we did bring in one game called Head Coach, which was very much a deliberate Football Manager clone for American football, which we sold ourselves, and it did quite well.
We're in an era now where piracy was as simple as putting a blank cassette into a hi-fi. I'll put my hand up and say I may have been guilty of it myself at times. Did piracy make much of an impact on you at this stage? Was it becoming more of a problem for your business, or not really?
Yeah, there's a loss of sales that comes from it, and sorry, just a thought. I can remember being at a show and a young lad coming up to me, and he was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and he said, "I've got your game and it doesn't work." And I said, "Oh, really?" And then I said, "Explain what happens." And so he told me, and I thought, that's what happens when you copy the game. So that's what I thought to myself. And I said, "Where did you buy the game?" He said, "Oh, I copied it off my friend." I thought, he's coming up to me complaining that it doesn't work because his pirate copy doesn't work, And I just told him to go away because he was only young anyway. But I did think it was remarkable that I'm supposed to fix it.
Yeah.
I think there's two things as well, though, because I think at the time we've discussed many times before, I don't think we realised it was piracy. You're sort of so used to like recording songs off the radio, you didn't even have this concept. But two, I guess also it must be very difficult to get the figures to know how many sales you didn't get.
Yeah. I've actually had somebody who's bought my new version of the game who actually said to me, "I saw this and I thought I ought to buy it so you get some money because I copied the original and played it a lot."
Yeah. Oh, that's nice.
Thank you. A little bit of justice there.
Yeah. And you alluded there to the fact that you maybe had put something in the program to stop piracy. Is that right?
Just a limited amount. I mean, the original game didn't have much protection on it because, it wasn't an issue when I first created it. So, it was kind of like around for such a long time that it went straight into the piracy era. Definitely it get pirated, and on the subsequent games it became more of a problem. I can remember a particular one Amiga version that lost a lot of sales to counterfeiting, actually, which is a different issue altogether. Yeah.
Kevin, would you like to introduce your next tune?
I just thought this was just a funny concept, and I mean, platform games, you're usually trying to make your way through obstacles to a destination, and somebody came up with the idea that the problem you have is you've had a curry, a Vindaloo, and it's hot, and you are desperate to get to the toilet, and there are obstacles in the way before the accident happens. I just loved that concept, and it was obviously revolutionary.
Sounds brilliant. That was the sound of Vindaloo. Do you like a Vindaloo, Kevin?
No, not particularly. I like curry, but I like mild curry. No.
What's your favourite curry?
My favourite curry. Actually, my favourite Indian food is biryani, actually.
Ooh.
I actually had the good fortune of going to India and tasted a lot of different foods, and I remember that was particularly good.
There you go. Andrew there asking the hard-hitting questions.
That's right. That's probably a Hyderabad.
Choice of naan bread, Kevin? What naan would you go for?
I'm gluten intolerant. I don't eat the naan.
Oh,
more for us.
you heard it here first.
I'd go for the Peshwari naan, Neil. And you?
I'm a Peshwari naan man, yeah. Yeah, pilau rice, Peshwari naan.
Yeah, it's very much an English food, this you're talking about.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure it is.
Absolutely.
I've not had the authentic experience.
When I went, I went that short time in India, they had hardly any curry there. I was asking for it, and they said, no, they only have that in England.
What, you mean I can't get a korma?
And a lager.
As we move into the latter part of the 80s, you make the decision to sell addictive games to Prism Leisure Corporation. How did this come about, and why did you make the decision to sell, Kevin?
Well, as I previously said, I had to make a difficult decision to try and get back to writing games. That's the decision I made. And I was actually in negotiations with them about something else, and they mentioned they wanted to buy a software company, and I just thought, I was like over dinner or something, and I was there thinking, shall I mention it? That I was thinking of selling my company, and they were going public as well, so it's part of their becoming a PLC. They wanted to do it, and I decided to mention it, and they just started the conversation and led to the sale.
So when you'd made that decision, when you're selling a company, what exactly were you selling? Was it the intellectual property or the people, the offices?
Yeah, it was the intellectual property was what they wanted. Yeah. So that was mainly what it was. Yeah.
So it must have been quite a hard decision then, because you're not only giving away your baby, but you're effectively losing the jobs of the people you employed.
Yes, there wasn't much of that actually at that time, but a little bit. Yeah, that was tough.
And
I mean, they really got substantial redundancy, so it wasn't exactly really bad or anything like that. But it was, I couldn't carry on. I couldn't continue to as it was anyway. So it was a decision that had to be made.
And you did continue to make 2 more versions of Football Manager under the Prism Leisure banner. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. They contracted me for a couple of games, and there was Football Manager 2. Got Football Manager 2 written, which was good, and I was happy with that. But it was extremely hard work, and then the World Cup edition followed.
Was there an element of relief in being able to concentrate solely on just making the games and not having to run the business?
Yes, there was, but it was such a big release that that it was actually very demanding. When I wrote Football Manager 2, I had at that time developed with President, which is a previous another game I'd done just before the sale. That I developed a cross-development system, so my code was running on all of the versions, and Football Manager 2 was on so many machines because the market was so fragmented at that time that actually I wrote code that ran on I think it was 40 different releases when you include tape and disc as well.
Wow!
Because it was 7 formats, 5 languages, so 35 and a couple of tape and disc. But it was a huge effort on me because I had some other developers working on elements of it, but the core of the game, the nucleus, all the gameplay was running on my code, and I created it in Forth.
Okay.
So with these new games that you wanted to introduce, obviously new elements, gameplay, did you find that Forth give you the speed advantage over the previous use of BASIC?
Well, the big advantage was the cross development at the time, which I'd got working on the President game. It was quick, fine. It was fine, yeah, because it's a very tight little. It's a very small nucleus of code that you build from, but the main advantage was being able to write the same code and running on everything, and that worked. 68,000, 6502, Z80 ran on all of them.
Well, any stress that you may have been under certainly wasn't showing on your face on the adverts in the magazines. You were as smiling and as happy as ever.
I never show stress.
Were there any, of all of those machines, do any of those machines or those ports stand out as being your favourites?
I used to like working on the Amstrad CPC for some reason. It was a nice machine to work with. I think when I was doing that, I was primarily coding and testing on the CPC first, and then cross developing on other things after that. The Atari as well, I liked. So they were probably the 2 machines I liked most. Atari was nice to use.
That's the ST, is it? The Atari?
ST, sorry, ST. Yeah.
Cool. Well, by 1990, we're starting to see some very slick competition taking advantage of the power of the 16-bit micros. Games like Dino Dini's Player Manager combined the game engine of Kickoff with a basic management simulation. And it was quite a basic management simulation compared to what you were putting out, but it was a decent game. And then in subsequent years, around about 92, I think it was, we'd see Championship Manager arrive, which was an incredibly in-depth game. And it lives on today with modern releases. Did you have more plans for Football Manager at this stage to take on that mounting competition? Do you think you could have added the complexity that the market seemed to be demanding, or do you think that Football Manager had run its course now?
I certainly don't think it had run its course. I had run my course in terms of I was pretty much burnt out by events at that point. I needed to do something else, which I did. If I was to look at it now, no. I mean, I'm kind of going through the same evolution again, but I don't think it's necessary to go in one direction. I find it a bit strange, and people do that quite often, is that the idea that there is one way to go with, a particular genre. To me, saying, oh well, the other, the Championship Manager, Football Manager, Championship Manager version has all these statistics and all these databases, and therefore that's the way it has to go. To me is like saying, a particular rock band has created a particular kind of rock. Therefore, there's no point in any other band doing rock. It's what I don't get that. And to me, it may be that some people have followed that pattern and said, "Oh, well, they seem to be the market leader, so we'll go the same way." But to me, if I put my original Football Manager game and even the version I've done now alongside that game, they're completely different games. The only similarity is the subject matter. It's a style difference, but it's a style difference that can occur within a genre in the same way as in music. So I don't see any connection, and I don't need to take any guidance from it, because that's their path, it's their style. And with anybody else as well who's doing the same thing, they'll do it their way. So that's the way I see it artistically. Anyway, it's just you can have many bands in a genre, you can have many computer games in a genre as well, with different structures.
And with your commitment to deliver 2 more games for Prism Leisure fulfilled, you decided to take a hiatus from the games industry.
Yeah.
So what did you decide to do with your life then, Kevin?
Well, it's hard to look back at it. It's almost like it wanders off. But yeah, I mean, I did a lot of. I've been doing a lot of business software. So I stayed in software, but I did a lot of business software, and I've traveled as well. With that, the two things are linked, because very often I'm traveling for a job, and so yeah, and I've lived in the Netherlands. I've lived in actually 7 different countries in total, and always working, on software development of various sorts. I ended up as far away as New Zealand, where I spent more than 10 years, and love the country, and now in Canada. But the business software is the lead to that, and I've done various roles and some very interesting projects, for sort of City of London banks, did a project for the European Space Agency and things like that. And media companies. And I've done various roles. I've been a software architect. I've led teams, I've trained people, and it's been a busy time. And it's sort of sideline, I've kept an interest in sort of playing around with developing computer games, occasionally done something as well. And kind of now my focus has come very much around to doing more of that.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly find out a little bit more about that after your next track, including the return of Football Manager. Can you tell us what your next track is, please, Kevin?
The next is Mario 64, which is, again, I would say, another of those games which to me provides an atmosphere on Nintendo 64. It's just, there was so much color, it was such a pleasant game, some straightforward game elements, but just mostly atmosphere. I just felt it was a sort of, very uplifting kind of game. Some games can get so dark, and I really liked that one. I also used to play it with my children, so that was part of the fun.
So, Kevin, you've stepped away from the games industry now, as you explained. Did you miss the hustle and bustle of the games industry while you were away, or were you satisfied with the work that you were doing?
Actually, no, it's all pretty interesting. I mean, it's not the same, but it was it's never dull. The sort of things I've been doing. I can't think of. I was usually a contractor, usually on some kind of challenging project to get complete, and I met a lot of interesting people because I worked at different places. Because I was a contractor, I would go in and do a piece of work and finish it. Sometimes it would extend for a long time. I mean, for example, one of the best ones is I worked as I started working on the SDKs for the Philips Hue internet connected lights before they were launched, and eventually that led on to me becoming the key developer evangelist for Philips Hue, and leading the developer program for third-party developers. And I used to travel and to do hackathons and run hackathons and take part in huge ones. I mean, did one in Las Vegas for 2,000 developers, and it was definitely interesting. And did that one for 3 years. So yeah, I've had some interesting stuff, not computer games, sometimes linked to it, but not in computer games.
So you mentioned there the hackathons and that sort of creative community. So did you keep up the old games programming as a hobby? Are there any unfinished titles still waiting to be?
Yeah, no, I did. I did continue, and eventually, when I was doing mobile development, I started on that track as well. And I did actually spend a long time. It's kind of almost like a personal lesson. I spent a long time writing a game which I did release, which is now not available on the iPhone, because what I did was I made the mistake of battling with this. It was a Football Manager game, but I made a mistake of battling with it until it was complete, and then it was good, but just not as good as I wanted it to be. But I spent far too long on it, and just needed to realize it wasn't going the way I wanted, and I should step back. And I also wrote a online football management game as well, which was released, but it was also released for the New Zealand Football Championship, where I was at the time as well. So they used to be played online, associated with the New Zealand Football Association at that time as well. So I did that as well.
New Zealand, a country with a population of 4 million, so that's quite a niche game to release, really. You didn't...
Oh well, no, I actually released it. It was actually it was actually released online as a normal game called Footy Max, which was a good game, but some issues with the commercial side there. But the New Zealand one was just like a trial run, and just allowed them to include it. I adapted it for them. So yes, it wasn't certainly. I was paid for it, but it wasn't like, oh, this is what the target is, because no, it would be very small. Mm-hmm. And even then, I was choosing the wrong sport. It would have to be rugby. So,
yeah. And, we were starting to see around this stage mobile phones becoming a little bit more powerful, smartphones going in our pockets, those quite horrendous early Java games starting to appear. We will come on in a minute to the fact that you have now released the new Football Manager on Android and iOS, but were you tempted before those platforms to try and release a Java version, or to jump on a little bit earlier, or not really?
I was not tempted, but certainly looked at it. But it was I actually did write some J2ME software for the Java mobiles. It was a standard, so I did some business software on it. It was a standard that was not very good, not very standardized. It was different phones, very limited. It was a bit too limited and too variable. It's like the Oric One.
Right. Yeah. Good comparison. Yeah.
But so to get it to work, so that the business software I did, I remember it was that bad, which is very similar to the Oric One in a way, that we had to release it with a list of actual mobile devices that we tested it on. And that's not really a good standard. You say, like, it works on this phone, this phone, this phone, this phone. And it's supposed to work on all phones. That's what the J2ME standard was. But it wasn't like that. So, lots of good.
So your next destination is Canada, which is where you're talking to us from today, Kevin. So you've led quite the jet-setting lifestyle. So what took you to Canada?
A woman.
It's always the answer, isn't it? It's always the answer.
It's one of two. It's either that or a job. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, we'll be rounding off today's chat by learning all about the return of Football Manager. But before we do, can you introduce your next tune, please, Kevin? My
next tune is Wii Sports, which was, absolutely scores on one of the things I value highly in games, which is gameplay. And it's a lot of fun and, of course, physical. And again, one I would play for my children, but just, a really good departure to get people more active playing computer games, which was one of his strengths.
So Kevin, ever the marketing man, now's your time to shine. Tell us about the brand new Football Manager.
Well, it's actually called Football Star Manager. It's Kevin Tobbs Football Star Manager, but with an asterisk. But it really started actually because online I got talking to people, and I realized I could renew my original game on mobile, and it might be worth doing. And I suggested it online, and people told me yes, and then I started it. And so what I have done over a period of time is recreated the gameplay qualities of the original game, but for mobile. And the style is the same because it's the same writer, of course. And I've actually got it on iOS, Android, Kindle Fire, but it's also on Windows 10 and Mac OS X as well. So it's actually on 5 platforms, and it's doing very well. People love it.
Yeah, I like that it's on the Kindle Fire. That's a nice way to play a football management game. Yeah.
And does it emphasise more individuality on it? The star.
They're the star players. But the strengths is that it's very easy to play, and you don't have the masses of statistics that other games do, and that's one of the attractions. That the gameplay is very addictive and fun, and one of its other things that people like is that it is completely independent of Wi-Fi as well. You don't need to be connected to play. And that allows people, and people do, to play it on occasionally, wherever they are. After all, it's mobile, and they play also on flights. A lot of people will play, tell me when they're flying somewhere, they will play it, or if they're traveling, commuting. So it's something that the original game couldn't have, because you had to sit with a television to play it. So that's a really nice aspect. Now, obviously, I've done it as a touch interface, but kept it very retro as well. It has a very strong nostalgia feel for people, because it feels the same to them. The game is strongly honors my original design, but it's completely new. I've added some things, but I've also got to a point where I can't add too much because people don't want me to depart too much from the original. So that's an interesting challenge, that.
Yeah, and you spoke earlier about some of the letters that you used to get and how you'd use those quotes in advertising. But now you're in a position where you can get instant feedback on this game from people. Are you getting some feedback, and what kind of things are you hearing?
Oh, very, very nice feedback, and it's really nice. I mean, they sometimes talk about the old games as well, because it's the first chance they've had to talk to me. And I have a Facebook page, and I'm pretty active on that, and on Twitter as well. And I basically very much enjoy chatting to people. At the moment, I'm doing a thing where I'm playing the game myself on its highest difficulty level 7, and reporting daily on my progress, which people find quite entertaining as well, to see the actual author fighting with his own game and getting beaten by it sometimes as well. I played it on level 6 and went bankrupt as Torquay, which they found very entertaining. I got bankrupt in my own game. So, yeah, I can't cheat. I have no cheats. So, it's really good. I mean, particularly being able to talk to people directly who play my game is very new for me. I never had that before, and I like that a lot.
So you implied that there's quite a lot of players of the original game trying your new game. Do you have a feel on how many,
Well, that's what I would expect, because that was who it was aimed at. It was aimed for people who played the original, but quite a few people tell me they never played the original, and they're playing this, or because it's they find it refreshing in its ease of use and speed of play as well. Somebody told me that when they play the other football management game, that they played 200 hours and got through 7 seasons. And I said, really? I said, well, if you played mine and you played 200 hours, you'd do 200 seasons. And, that is, people do play hundreds of seasons of the game. So it's obviously got the appeal to keep them interested. Because that's the thing. Simple is only on the surface, the subtleties underneath and the stuff that keeps you interested. There's quite a lot of complexity in the gameplay. Which all interacts with the various elements. I could talk about that, but it would take a long time.
Well, quite satisfyingly, I've seen that in the Android store for the retro price of £2.99. So there's no reason not to give it a try, I think. And I assume it's easy enough for people to find in the usual stores. Is that where they go looking for it?
Actually, it's easier because there's so many football management games. The easiest way is actually my name, Kevin Toms. If you look for Kevin Toms, you can find it.
There you go, excellent. Well, I'm glad it's got an offline mode, because that will serve you well when we abandon you on Retro Island. You can become the best football manager on the island.
It's like Pong all over again.
With palm trees.
Yeah, with palm trees. I like that part, yeah.
Kevin, you now have 2 important decisions to make before we leave you on Retro Island. You can pick only one of the 8 tracks you've shared with us today to keep you company. Which will it be and why?
I think it would be Space Invaders, because the fact that I can find the sound effect of Space Invaders moving from side to side, relaxing, I might need that hypnotism while I'm on that island. And then it will also remind me of having beer and pasties in the pub, which has to be a good thing to think of.
Very nice. And you can also pick one game or application to enjoy on Retro Island, the only condition being that it has no internet connectivity. What will you take with you?
Oh, you mean apart from Football Star Manager by Kevin Toms?
There he is. There's the marketing man.
Nothing else comes to mind. But actually, if I was to choose one, I'd probably international soccer.
There we go.
Yeah.
You've made your choices, and we hope they serve you well in your survival on Retro Island. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Kevin. And if you enjoyed the show today, why not take a moment to check out the other podcast episodes, or you can find more retro goodness on my YouTube channel, RetroManCave.
And you can find me on the YouTube channel BackOfficeShow, to which you'll find links in the show notes, as well as links to Kevin's music choices and his website. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.